morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Fast Company Grill, day 3. Hope you're enjoying yourselves. My name is Brendan Vaughn. I'm editor-in-chief of Fast Company. Excited to see all of you out here this morning, looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Whoa, who's that? Somebody's competing with me. Shut up over there. I'm here with RJ Scaringe, CEO of Rivian. Rivian, of course, is the premium SUV EV maker. They also have a commercial van fleet. They also are getting into the business of providing software and other services for other entities in the larger EV ecosystem. I really want to get into that. I think that's a super interesting area, and I believe contributor to your revenue. So the company is narrowly, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, please, RJ, narrowly gross profit profitable for 2025 on revenue of about $5 billion, but still losing quite a bit of money when you factor in all of the R&D expense and everything else that's going on an EBITDA basis. So some positive momentum, still a long way to go. Let's start with a question about kind of just how you see the whole EV moment that we're in right now, which you're bullish. You would be bullish. You are, no offense, I will take that with a grain of salt, but there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. There are plenty of reasons to be concerned. So how do you see the state of the overall market right now? When you wake up in the morning and look at sort of the landscape that you're competing in, what do you see? What gives you some pause and what gives you a reason to be hopeful?
Well, first, thanks for having me here. This is great to join you to talk about some of these exciting things. When we think about electrification, very recently this has started to become politicized, and to a higher degree than I think what certainly I expected, and certainly what it deserves. And so we work really hard to depoliticize the idea of electrification. And maybe to start, before I answer your full question, just to start to make a statement here, which I think is always helpful for people to reframe how they think about electrification. About half of Rivian's customers identify as Republican, and about the other half identify as Democrat. And that's awesome. This is very, very good news, because I think there's often the projection or the perception that EV buyers are all far left, and that just further sort of perpetuates this myth that electric vehicles aren't broadly appealing. And I think that's the key to your question is ultimately.
And isn't right here in Texas, for example, like Buc-ee's, wasn't Buc-ee's a major contributor to charging stations? And here in the red state, blue city of Austin, but red state of Texas.
And so the way that I think any technology is going to scale, whether it's electrification, whether it's solar on rooftop, all these new technologies that are working towards a carbon-free economy, they have to be materially better than their alternative. And so electric vehicle needs to be more fun to drive, easier to use, have more functionality, needs to be priced competitively. And so for us, we're about to launch a high-volume product, what we call R2. This is a really important product for us, but it's also an amazing product to have in the market just to give consumers another great choice. R2 is a vehicle that's a 5-passenger midsize SUV, accelerates 0 to 60 faster than a Porsche 911. It can go off-road. It can fit your kids in it. It has more storage capacity than anything else in its class. And on top of all that, it starts at $45,000. And so just the idea of a vehicle that resets your expectations, it draws people in to electrification versus pushing people to take an electric product.
How do you think about the market between the $70,000, that's approximate. I mean, I'm sure of the R1 and this $25,000 difference. Like, who is that difference in your mind? Who are those people?
Yeah, so Rivian launched in late 2021. We have a flagship set of products, what we call the R1T and the R1S. It's a sibling set of products. You see a bunch of them around here, which is great. But the average selling price of these is around $90,000, just over $90,000. So they are, by virtue of that, they are expensive vehicles, and the scale or the size of the market that they can address just because of the pricing is fairly limited. Now, saying that, the R1S is the best-selling premium electric SUV in the United States. So for SUVs over $60,000, we have the best-selling electric SUV. We have significant market share leadership there. But in order to get to a lot of volume, we really need to move to mass market pricing. And so the average price of a new car in the United States is right around $50,000. It sort of jumps between 50 and 51 every year. And so this R2 product, starting at 45, hits right into the thick of where most car purchases are being made, and within a segment that's by far and away the most popular, which is a 5-passenger, 2-row SUV.
Okay, I have some follow-up to that, but let's pull back and just, if you could give folks an overview of the company in terms of the percentage, that each division represents. I would especially like to hear, as I mentioned, about that software unit. I don't know if it's its own department or if how you productize that work, but I do know that it's high margin relative to making hardware, cars and trucks and SUVs. So if you could talk about that a bit as well.
Yeah, so maybe a little context. So Rivian started the company in 2009, and we took the approach fairly early on of identifying the core technologies we wanted to vertically integrate. And so within that, we vertically integrated our electronics, we vertically integrated our software. And in the beginning, these were things we had to build skill set around. And so we didn't have, in the very beginning, it was just me. So it was a one-person company. But over time, we started to accumulate real capability and an incredible engineering organization for developing software, developing electronics, and developing these digital ecosystems. And with that, we took the decision to not rely on traditional tier one suppliers. And so the way the auto industry is set up is, with the exception of Rivian and Tesla, car companies rely on third parties to do electronics or software that go into the vehicles. And let's say a normal large manufacturer might have hundreds of different suppliers making little islands of software that all have to interconnect. And so they're very, very complex software architectures, very, very complex electronics architectures because of this reliance on lots of different third parties. So in contrast, we took the decision to build all of that in-house. And to come to your question, in 2018, we were developing this, and we had a board meeting, and in the board meeting, one of our directors said, hey, do we really need to do all this in-house? Of course, me, I'm optimistic entrepreneur, I'm like, emphatically, of course we do. This is really, this is core to the business. It's how we make the products incredible. This is going to be the area of differentiation in the long term. Software and electronics is how we'll ultimately scale the business. And I said, if we do this really well, maybe we'll even be able to sell this to other manufacturers. And everybody's like, yeah, right, RJ, that's not going to happen.
So that was not part of the plan, selling it. Like you modeled it out with the assumption that it had to pay for itself, internal use only.
And so we modeled it out around the idea of we're building Rivian to be a large company. So if the company was only intending to sell just a flagship set of products, 50,000 units a year, it wouldn't warrant this very large, a huge engineering organization, a huge engineering budget. But we said we're building Rivian to be a company that makes millions of cars a year, so we must own all these technologies. But as I said, I always thought if we do this well, we could sell it. So fast forward, late 2024, we signed the largest software licensing deal in the history of the auto industry. We did a $5.8 billion deal with the second largest car maker in the world. This is Volkswagen Group. And so now all future Volkswagens, Porsches, Audis, a bunch of brands that aren't sold in the United States, Skoda, Seat, will use Rivian electronics and Rivian software as their core backbone. And so that's the first of what we believe will be many software and electronics deals like that.
Why don't they just buy you?
That's not the outcome we were looking for. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I interrupted you. Please continue.
No, that's you covered it. Yeah. So as it stands, so in terms of the split of the business, we have the largest revenue portion of the business is selling vehicles. That's going to continue to be the case, especially with the launch of R2. So, as you said, we did about $5 billion a year, or $5 billion in revenue last year. That's going to dramatically grow over the next 2 or 3 years, which allows us to cover, as you put it, the fixed cost and the OpEx that we built up to designing the company to be much larger. And so we sort of grow into our R&D budget, we grow into our OpEx, we grow into the way we've architected our go-to-market. But in parallel to that, we also continually capture value from the technologies we've developed. And our Volkswagen relationship is an example of that. I think there are many opportunities to do that within the automotive space.
So what are the most challenging technical hurdles or sources of like pockets of cost in the kind of EV specific engineering? I mean, the battery is the obvious one, but the things that are kind of getting in the way of making EVs, especially beautiful ones like the ones that you guys make, that are design objects and objects of desire as much as they are cars for utility. Where are those like frustrating pockets for you of like bringing the cost down? There's lots of talk about BYD and the $20,000 EV and in the kind of holy grail of that. Not really the business you guys are in at the moment, at least, but you must have these thorns in your side. What are they?
I don't know if there's necessarily frustrating cost. There's not any areas that are particularly uniquely frustrating in terms of like call it the physics of the problem. I think what's happened is geopolitics and some of the trade challenges are quite challenging to navigate because we do have big shifts in the cost of a lot of the raw materials. And when we talk about supply chains, when you look at it through the lens of a very simple product, like let's say a shirt or a coffee cup, they're very simple. Maybe there's 2 or 3 suppliers in a system. When you look at the supply chain for something very complex like a car, there's thousands of companies that are making pieces of the car that come together. So I'll use the example of a headlight. We buy the headlight from a supplier. That supplier happens to be the United States. But in the case of our headlight, we've mapped this one so I can use it as an example. There's between 4 and 5 tiers of additional suppliers that then feed in. So the headlight manufacturer isn't mining material, so they have sub-suppliers that make components. Those sub-suppliers aren't mining material. They have suppliers that make components. Those suppliers aren't, in fact, mining materials. They have sub-suppliers that are raw material. And so you have to go back 4 or 5 layers to get to where the raw material comes from. And that's just for a headlight. And so you extrapolate this across, without exaggeration, there's tens of thousands of companies that are involved in making one Rivian. And we don't interact with all of them. So we interact with maybe 500 or 600 of those companies directly. We would call those our tier 1 suppliers directly to us. But the complexity of these long supply chains means that we often aren't involved in a sourcing decision on the raw aluminum that may be going into a bezel that then goes into a sub-assembly that then goes into another sub-assembly that then gets provided to the headlight supplier that then gets supplied to us. And so when things shock the system, it seems like, oh, you should just be able to call all your suppliers and change your strategy. There's just tens of thousands of companies, many of which you don't have contracts with, nor have you ever even met with, that are just in this ecosystem. And so, of course, we now have built over the last few years a lot of tools to map this and to identify supply risks and identify commodity risks and take more of an upstream role. And in some of the most challenging areas like batteries, we now actually work directly with the mines. So we skip all these layers and go straight to the mine. We source the material and we drive it through our supply chain. But it takes an incredibly concentrated effort. And if you were to ask me, and I started, as I said, in 2009, if you were to ask me in 2009 if we would have, as a car company, a team focused on mining, I would have said probably not. But here we are. We have mining experts. We have material processing experts for raw material for things that we, in fact, it's not our business, but we need to understand that very closely.
Do you think you'll work with, I recently actually interviewed Barbara Humpton, the CEO of USA Rare Earth, this company that has recently gotten a big contract with the federal government to mine minerals for a lot of the AI infrastructure and EVs and just batteries in general. We have not mined this in our country. Some of these minerals, I think never, but some of them not in a long time, and we get almost all of them from China. So there's a very serious geopolitical reason for us to develop these sources here in the U.S. So just to set up my question, that's going on, a really interesting area of American industry right now. Do you expect to work with them, or where will you guys get those minerals?
Yeah, I mean, we're working really hard to find domestic sources for everything that we can. But there's really two challenges to the problem. So the first is the Earth does not have a consistent, the geology of the Earth is not like this consistent layer around the whole planet. I say this, it sounds so obvious, but there's certain areas of the planet that have high concentrations of certain materials and certain areas that don't. And so let's pick something. Let's take nickel. Nickel is necessary in high energy density batteries. 93% of the world's nickel comes out of Indonesia. And so we can try to make nickel mining happen in the United States, but it just doesn't work. It's like it's where it is. And so that means we have to have trade relationships with places that have these things. And in the case of the fossil fuel economy, the United States was actually very fortunate. We had a lot of oil reserves and we had a lot of coal. It's a different ecosystem when it comes to some of these advanced materials, not just for energy, but for rare earth metals, which you need for magnets that go into motors. There's a whole host of these challenges just exist. So that's the first challenge. The second,
and that's mostly what the company I mentioned is doing, is the rare earth metals, the magnet facility, and a deposit here in Texas that they're mining.
Exactly. And then the second challenge, which is a real practical one, is we could all sit in a room and say we'd really like to have a rare earth metal processing facility in the United States. And then none of us want to have it where we live. So it's this challenge of we want it, but actually if you gave me the choice of do I want it to come to my town, you will find you're wildly against it. So we've encountered this where we're building incredibly clean facilities where the facility is cleaner than what was there before, and there's just generally opposition to building manufacturing plants, particularly material processing plants in the United States.
Let's switch gears here a little bit to driverless technology. You recently said it will be inconceivable to buy a car that can't drive itself by 2030. At least I saw that you said that. If you were misquoted, please say so, but that was what I've read in my research. So can you rough that timeline out for us, and what makes you so confident?
So first, just to ground us, and when we talk about self-driving, we're at the very, very beginning of starting to see what this actually means. And so in a consumer, like a personally owned vehicle, what you can buy today is what's called level 2, which means that the most capable system, like a Tesla FSD, you can plug in the address into the car, it will drive to that address, but you as the driver of the vehicle still need to be paying attention. And so what you can experience as a general public is you can experience level 4, which is what a Waymo is, which is the vehicle can drive itself empty. And in between level 4 and level 2, there's level 3, which is the vehicle can drive itself and you can not pay attention. So you can take your hands off the wheel, your eyes off the road. And so I just described that briefly just so we understand. Like, we're going to go through a staircase over the next couple of years where today, level 2 is going to start to become fairly, I think, required, meaning in the next year or two. So in the case of Rivian, later this year, we launch a point-to-point navigation. So you type the address in, the vehicle will drive itself. You can have your hands off the wheel, but you have to largely be, alert and paying attention. Next year, we'll go eyes off, where you can take your eyes off the road, starting with highways and then growing from there. So you can read a book on your commute. You can be on your phone. The car won't beep at you. You can be totally okay not paying attention. And then in 2028 is where we start to see what we call personal level 4, where the car can drive itself fully on its own. And I'm very, very bullish on the pace at which we're going to see autonomous features progress, largely because the way we're developing autonomy is materially different than what was done from the very beginnings of this. So call it early 2010s up through like 2022, where autonomous systems were developed around a rules-based approach. So essentially, we would have humans that would describe with code like what the rules of the road are, how the car should behave in certain situations. And that dramatically changed as we moved to a neural net-based approach. So ironically, like early self-driving cars were not actually AI. They were really rules-based environments with really sophisticated code sets, maybe some machine learning for vision processing, but not really anything in terms of modern AI. So the modern AI that's emerged in the last couple of years is just changing entirely how we approach this. So now we build large-scale foundation models by absorbing and picking up data from the large data flywheel, which is the deployed fleet, to learn to drive in a similar fashion now humans learn to drive. And it's a much more generalized skill, and you can deploy it in a lot more environments more rapidly. But I actually think if there's nothing you take away from this talk today, there's one thing at which I'd say, if you take away only one thing, this is it, which is we as humans often look to the past as a way to try to predict the future. And so we look at the rate of progress of something over the last couple of years and we say that's about what we think the next few years are going to look like. And that is often true, which is why our brains tend to think like that. But in certain areas and certain technologies, there are inflection points that change the rate of progress. And so in the field of self-driving, and I'd say more broadly in the field of AI in the physical world, of course, we're already experiencing AI in the written video or image world. But in the physical world, the progress that's been made over the last 5 years, let's say from 2021 through 2026, is wildly different than what we're going to see between 2026 and 2031. And I think it's easy to say, oh, he's just an entrepreneur that's like overly bullish. There's a technical shift, like a fundamental inflection point that has happened that's going to lead the progress to be far greater than I think what we're expecting. And so for that reason, I'm quite bullish on this. I actually think the technology is going to develop faster than society is going to be able to ingest. But I think society will quickly catch up. And the reason I think in self-driving will catch up so quickly is we see it. It's like so nice to have your time back. Imagine all of us, even if you say, I don't trust self-driving, you get in the car and you're like, oh, my phone's buzzing. I'd love to look at it. Or boy, I'm sitting next to someone. I'd love to have a conversation and not pay attention. You try it a few times. You start to realize the car is much safer. It doesn't get distracted. The bright light of the sun doesn't mess up your vision of the road. Can see perfectly at night. Like all these things that we as humans are imperfect at driving at, as evidenced by the fact that there's unfortunately over 40,000 deaths from human driving every year today, just in the United States alone. It's a much, much larger number for the globe. But so I think we're going to see a big shift in how we operate our vehicles I'm bullish on this over the next 5 years, but certainly over the next 5 to 10 years.
So yeah, I mean, there's so much data saying that self-driving is safer, but viscerally, people just don't want to hear that. They take the far fewer number of incidences of self-driving accidents and give that a lot more attention than the 40,000 deaths. I do wonder if, I guess that will eventually change. It's people don't like to let go of these kind of more visceral reactions to statistics, regardless of what the statistical story says. It's just probably going to take some time. Love to talk a little bit about your industrial robot startup, Mind Robotics. Just announced a $500 million Series A round. Tell us, how did Rivian lead to Mind Robotics, and what are your plans for the company?
So I just spoke about AI in the physical world. As you can probably see, I'm quite convicted on it. But Rivian runs manufacturing today, and so we have a plant in Illinois. We have over 5,000 people that work in that plant. But if you were to walk into the plant, you'd see robots everywhere. So you'd see thousands of 6-axis robots doing what looks like modern tech. It would look really advanced, and to the untrained eye, you'd say, boy, that looks really cool. But the robots that are in industrial applications today, that's inclusive of Rivian and essentially all manufacturing that's using automation, they're very classical. So they're fixed motion plans. So it's a prescribed motion plan that's repeating over and over again. They're PLC controlled, so they're actually programmed on the robot themselves. So we're not even using modern software architectures, and they're not at all doing tasks that humans can do. So they're not capable of human-like skill in terms of dealing with variability, having any level of reasoning, or having any level of adaptation based upon circumstances. And if they do have any level of adaptation, it's very, very minor. It's not human-like. And so about 2 years ago, I kicked off an effort within Rivian to say, what is the future of this going to look like? We have an extreme shortage of industrial labor in the United States. I don't think this is appreciated. We often talk about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. One of the challenges we don't have people to work in manufacturing in the United States. And so there is a truly extreme lack of labor availability. And if we plan to scale, which of course we do, we'll need to solve this. So we started looking at what could we do in industrial robotics. And to oversimplify it, I would characterize it as there's essentially two types of robotics companies. The ones that are making robots today, of which we're a customer. These are these 6-axis robots. You've all, I'm sure, seen pictures of these. And I think those types of companies will continue to make those robots. I think they'll continue to be successful for classic industrial applications or industrial use cases. But I don't see them as being part of developing robotics that can do human-like tasks or have human-like skill. So if that's one category, the other category is a host of new companies that have emerged recently that are building robots that have more human-like skill. And so we met with a lot of these companies and essentially came to the view that I wanted to start my own company, came to the view that this is really important. I think I can do it. I have a unique set of ingredients between a huge data flywheel with Rivian, a massive deployment environment with Rivian as our first customer, a need within Rivian. And so I decided to start a separate company. I'm the chairman and the CEO of Rivian. Rivian's a public company. So from a governance point of view, that took some discussion. So over the course of the course of 2025, I spent a lot of time with our board, Rivian's board, and we designed how this would work from a governance point of view. And then in November of last year, I launched the company. I raised a small seed round, so I raised just over $100 million as a seed. And then, as you said, we've just raised another $500 million. But I'm very, very, very bullish on this company and the rate at which the models can generalize when you start to use new techniques for building neural nets for understanding industrial, how to essentially have skills in the industrial setting. And I think it is truly how we bring manufacturing to the United States. It's the idea that we're going to recreate like the 1950s version of the United States. That's just gone. It just doesn't exist. There's not a workforce that wants to do that. The cost structure can't support being globally competitive. So the way we do that, which is how the United States typically leads, is with technology. So I see a real opportunity to build one of the strongest and most capable industrial robotics companies in the world. And of course, that's why I set up Mind.
All right, so we got 1 minute left. I want to tie all these threads together in a quick 1 minute overview answer to this question. Physical AI, driverless vehicles, all the other work that we've covered. What is Rivian's product line in, say, 3 to 5 years? How many different vehicle types are there? And what is the kind of price points of those, or the ranges of those products?
So we're about to launch R2. And it's super cool. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Following R2, there's an R3, and it's like more of a hatchback crossover vehicle. And then we haven't shown them, but you can imagine there's an R4 and then there's an R5. So
brilliant.
I know. Yeah. Maybe AI can help us with the naming. Yeah. So we have this immediate set of products. It's going to be much more accessible, much more affordably priced, but that's not where it ends. We see, and again, this gets back to why I'm such an AI optimist. I think the opportunity to continue to remove costs and make these products more accessible requires technology, requires innovation. How they're made requires innovation in supply chains. And so R2, R3 are the things we've talked about and shown. So in the next 3 years, that's about what will be, what will be in the market. But if you extend out into the early 2030s, we're already thinking about what those are. But R4 and R5 will be taking this even further and really working to integrate some of the things we talked about in terms of removing costs, making these more accessible, and continue to make them really exciting and desirable products.
All right. RJ Scaringe, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.